Thanks for being with us, Jim. The Albanese government claim that they have fiscal and monetary policy working in the same direction to bring down inflation. Their surpluses are putting downward pressure on inflation, making everyone's mortgages, rent, and grocery bills cheaper. That their employment and wage numbers are good, excellent even, unprecedented in recent times, and that they've helped that by advocating at the Fair Work Commission for low-wage workers' wages to keep pace with inflation. That they listened and acted on stage 3 tax cuts. Indeed, they listened to the Australia Institute and people like us and you at some cost to their reputation, they would say, but in the interest of working people. That they've enacted greater rights for union delegates, made reforms favouring gig workers, legislated the right to disconnect, invested in the federal public service after good campaigning by the CPSU, and boosted the wages of aged care workers after, again, campaigning in that sector by our comrades. And they've just announced yesterday their intention to massively invest in onshoring manufacturing, securing our sovereign capabilities and creating thousands of jobs, good union jobs, potentially. So what are us lefties still whinging about? Are we ingrates?
Oh, far from it. Many of the things that you've listed, Luke, are genuine achievements, and we should applaud the government, but also celebrate the years and years of education and activism and mobilization that pushed the government to do those good things. There's no doubt about it. The wage gains for aged care workers, the changes in the IR laws aren't enough yet. We've still got more progress to do, but they are going to be important. And some of the other achievements that you've listed. Now, what I would take off the list is boasting about the fiscal and monetary policy stance of the government. That's not helping bring down inflation at all. Inflation after the COVID pandemic was not caused by government deficits or interest rates that were too low. It was caused by companies taking advantage of an unprecedented catastrophe and soaking it to us. So if inflation's coming down, it's not because of a budget surplus, believe me. And there is clearly in this government a knee-jerk tendency to accept orthodox neoliberal fiscal policy benchmarks, such as the apparent need to always have a surplus. And those benchmarks, I think, have been rejected in most of the world, but we still face a battle in Australia to win that debate here. Now, the fact that the government has done some good things that we can't deny and have no need to deny, we should, in fact, help take credit for those. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be pushing and critiquing the government and demanding more in all of those areas, including industrial relations and labor policy, industry policy. Some of these announcements, I think, have a lot of potential, but the proof will be in the execution of them and making sure that they're real, not just photo ops. And in other areas like social policy, anti-poverty policy, and perhaps most acutely environmental policy, the government has a long way to go. So I think the historic function of independent progressive movements is precisely to try and hold progressive governments to account when they get into office, because all too often we have seen governments, running from the left but governing from the right, if you like, including in Australia's history. And I think so far the Albanese government has a lot to be proud of, and that we should be proud of. But clearly, that doesn't mean we should sit back and just be a passive audience. We have to be out there demanding and mobilizing more.
So, in terms of demanding, mobilising more, what should the left be fighting for right now, particularly in the arena of reducing inequality? Something you've done a lot of work on advocacy about. What's winnable, and what would you say is most important, especially with your international perspective? Is there something being done elsewhere that we can learn from? Yeah.
Coming to Australia from overseas, I was always struck by the cognitive dissonance, if you like, between the idea that Australia is a land of a fair go, and that we've got this very proud history of egalitarian policy and trade unionism and so on, but the actual reality, which is one of growing inequality and the, in a way, ruthless expression of power by old money in Australia, which really is, among the worst of all industrial countries. To be sure, Australia is still better than America. And, we could get a repetitive strain injury from patting ourselves on the back for that rather hollow achievement. But compared to the rest of the industrial world, and more importantly, compared to what's possible, Australia is underachieving big time. in terms of its commitment to ensure that everyone in this continent has access to a decent, secure life. So we had an interesting experiment during the COVID pandemic under Scott Morrison, of all people. We paid out literally hundreds of billions of dollars in emergency aid through the coronavirus supplement and the JobKeeper program. And amazing what happened in the middle of a health and public emergency. Poverty went down and equality improved measurably in the statistics because of what we were doing. Then, of course, as soon as the lockdowns ended, Morrison ripped all those things away, and we were back to the orthodox dogma that you can't give people free money, otherwise they'll lose their work ethic. And now we're back in the soup in terms of where inequality is and poverty, which is now we know avoidable. Poverty is not an inevitable outcome; it is a choice, an economic and social and political choice. So I do think that we, in a way, can't let the lesson of the pandemic be forgotten. And things like the abhorrently low level of job seeker benefits for unemployed adults needs to be absolutely addressed. And then even levels of poverty among children and families with children and among seniors. So, Australia is still one of the richest countries in the world, but not all Australians are getting a share of it. And I do think that this is a moment when we should be making fundamental reforms to our income and social security programs to make sure that everyone has the chance of a life without poverty, which, again, we learned is a choice.
Some conservatives saying that inequality isn't really a concern at all. It's nothing to worry about. You're always going to have inequality in a free society. And they talk about focusing on individual choices such as drug and alcohol abuse, while reducing regulations and allowing entrepreneurial individuals to shine and therefore bring value to all of us. What's wrong with those prescriptions? Don't we need more people like Mike Cannon-Brookes? He's a progressive billionaire, investing in climate and bringing money to Australia and so forth. Is that a sustainable path to economic growth and raising the tide for all boats?
Well, I'll take Mike Cannon-Brookes over Elon Musk any day, but we can't put our future in the hands of billionaires, no matter how sort of liberal sounding they may be. And it's an age-old response to the exploitation and poverty that people experience from those in power to blame the victim and say their fault was a lack of work ethic or a lack of personal responsibility or a lack of good family values at home. Even in the macroeconomic sphere, there's an incredible contradiction because there's this tendency to personally blame the victim. The reason you're unemployed is because you don't have the right skills or you didn't, look hard enough. But then, if by chance every Australian managed to get a job and buff up their resume and pick themselves up by their bootstraps, well, guess what? The Reserve Bank would jack up the interest rates in order to recreate an adequate level of unemployment to keep the rest of the working class disciplined. So it's actually a deliberate macroeconomic outcome to maintain a certain level of unemployment. The new Reserve Bank governor, Michelle Bullock, said it has to be at least 4.5% unemployment. And if we got to 4.5% unemployment and inflation and wage growth was still too high for her liking, she would just say it has to be higher. Now the so-called natural rate of unemployment is 5.5% or 6.5%. So even though the system is engineered to create and recreate poverty and inequality, the tendency in the ideology, the ruling class ideology, is to blame the victims for it so that we don't blame the system. But in fact, we need to understand how this system works and how these factors fit together. And again, how poverty and unemployment and exploitation are not natural outcomes, and they're not the result of personal failings. They are the inevitable result of a system that is governed to maximize profit for people who own wealth.
So what do we do about it in the medium and longer term? What should the left be putting forward and fighting for in terms of that systemic change you're talking about? And, the IPCC says that the time to dangerous climate tipping points is better measured in months rather than years. Are we rearranging chairs on the Titanic? Are we fiddling while the planet burns? What's the medium to longer? How do we change this system and not go down due to catastrophic climate change in the meantime?
I'm always a firm believer in the need to fight for immediate reforms and concrete improvements in people's lives to show that collective action works and can make a difference. But at the same time, to pair that with a deeper vision of the structural problems in the economy and in society that we have to understand and learn about and prepare ourselves to take on. So, ultimately, many of these problems, including climate change, are going to have to be solved by direct expression of democratic power over the big economic choices that get made. And that's going to include public ownership or collective ownership of things like energy utilities and housing and other important foundations of our whole economic and social lives. So, I think that it's hard to just go out and in the abstract say, public ownership or socialization of capital is what's required, because most people don't understand that. But if we can think of particular areas and industries, whether it's housing or the food system or transportation, or of course anything to do with climate and energy, then we can argue, private ownership and the profit motive is what's causing these problems. It's what's causing housing speculation so people can't afford a roof over their heads. It's what's causing powerful vested interests to continue to demand and win the right to extract more fossil fuels from Australia's earth and burn them, even though it's going to kill us. It's what's driving the unaffordability of food and the commercialization or commodification of food that is undermining health and quality of life for millions of people. And if we can find, concrete examples of ways that challenging the assumed right of private corporations to make all the decisions that affect our lives, and then replacing that with a system that is pragmatic and understandable to working people, then I think we can start to push back on the dominance of private ownership over our lives and win some capacity to fix these problems, including climate change, in the long run.
Thank you very much. But anything else that you wanted to, for Search members and comrades and supporters to consider around your areas of expertise?
I am very grateful to the Search Foundation and its members and activists for the role that you play building an independent and ambitious left voice in Australian political debates, and how you've done that in a non-sectarian and forward-looking way, and how you've engaged people from all generations and all walks of life. We're really glad at the Center for Future Work to partner with Search on many initiatives, and I wish you the best at this annual event and your campaigns in the year ahead.
Thank you so much, Jim. Safe travels, and we'll see you when you're back in Australia.
Very good. Okay, Luke, great.